Hello and welcome back to the Unofficial Gilded Age Aftershow, where we are talking all things HBO's The Gilded Age. My name is Kelsie Paul. I am the Interim Director of Learning here at the Frick Pittsburgh, and today I am joined by two wonderful friends and colleagues. I have Amanda Gillen, who is our Executive Director here at the Frick Pittsburgh, and we are joined again by Alonna Carter-Donaldson. She is a public historian, a writer, a professor, and an Associate Curator at the HEINZ History Center here in Pittsburgh. Alonna, you have been on the after show before with us, but welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back.
Yeah. So I wanted to start. It's always worth starting at the beginning when we have guests. You know, I'm sure some of our viewers will recognize you from previous seasons when you joined us. But for new folks that we have, start by telling us a little bit about sort of what you do in your work and sort of what your area of expertise is, and maybe a little bit about how that kind of fits in with what we're seeing on the Gilded Age.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the Associate Curator for the Museum of African American History here at the Senator John HEINZ History Center. And this is an initiative of the African American Program. And I'm responsible for collecting items that tell the very extraordinary and unique story of African Americans in Western Pennsylvania, and also helping to develop new exhibits and improve our existing exhibits. My expertise is mostly in 19th century African American history, so spanning from about the Civil War on to I would say roughly 1910, so early 20th century as well. And of course, that ties into the show because the period of the Gilded Age, it's under speculation, but I believe it's around from 1870 to 1910, roughly.
Yep. So we are spot on right in your area of expertise, which is why we are so thrilled to have you. And we have like a couple of visitor questions that we'll get to at the end. But we have, as we always do, we have a lot to talk about in this episode. So we're going to jump right in. I always start with a synopsis. So we are talking about season 3, episode 7, Excommunicated. And here's our synopsis. Amid the release of a salacious book, Mrs. Astor confides in Bertha. Armed with updates from Arizona, Larry returns home to troubling news. Meanwhile, Oscar grieves, the ladies hold a suffrage meeting, and George is confronted by a violent intruder. We're going to get to all of those things and more today. So let's start with the salacious book. That is where the episode opens with the delivery of these books about town in New York City. And I think we talked about this a little bit in season 1 when Nathan Lane appears as Ward McAllister, because this is another plot line from the show that is really ripped from the history books. Ward McAllister did write a book called Society as I Have Found It. Came out a little later than it is in the show. It came out in 1890. We're still in 1884 in this season of the show. McAllister really wrote it kind of as a quasi-memoir. The first few episodes or first few chapters are about his family, and so where their money comes from and how he ended up in New York society. But the rest of the book really was kind of a tell-all about life in society and peeling back the curtain of society in New York City. What's funny is that, in the book, it's this big thing, it's everyone's reading it all over town. Everyone can't get their hands on it fast enough. In reality, the book was kind of boring. It was kind of critically panned there because he talks sort of ad nauseum about all of the things that these wealthy families are doing. They're going on turkey hunts, they're riding in their carriages, and critics were sort of, not super excited about it and thought that he wasn't a very good writer. So I don't think that actual Ward McAllister had quite the popular success that Nathan Lane's Ward McAllister does. But mainly it was kind of a critique in a lot of ways on just the excess of this society. That's what the press really latched onto, because in the last few chapters of the book, Ward starts dropping numbers. He starts saying what people are spending on these extravagant dinners and what they're paying their staff and how much they're paying for their homes. And that was really the thing that people sort of latched onto. And Alonna, I know that you were pointing out that this is something that was happening real time in the Gilded Age, just like it was today. People living at that time were looking around them and seeing this rise of this wealth inequity and pointing out the ways in which this was kind of ridiculous. And so Ward McAllister's book kind of played into that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're seeing during this period is really this growing wave of labor union influence. And it's not just happening here in the United States, it's happening across the globe. And it's not just about wages, it's really about dignity. It's about creating better quality of life for working people, making sure folks are treated fairly, that they have access to things that we take for granted now, right? Healthcare, education, and the support that they need to actually have a quality life, and just to survive. And so in many ways, we are still seeing this in our system, right? That kind of mirrors these old Victorian values where the needs of the worker often come last. And the shift that we see in the show is about changing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, right, because if Ward McAllister is going to open up the receipt books and say, hey, these families are dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars on these extravagant parties, and in these lavish houses, that's giving, normal Americans, normal people around the world proof that like, this is absurd. Like I can't even afford to feed my family. And these people are living in this way. But Amanda, you were pointing out that the whole idea that Ward McAllister would write this book and publish it is a little insane, given the fact that he valued his place in society so much. He really sort of fancied himself a tastemaker, a power player, and you like Truman Capote after him. He really just threw it all the way, which is maybe the stupidest thing that he could have ever done.
Alonna and I talked about this yesterday because right on its face, it's like, what is this man thinking, right? He basically blew up his position in society, which is what his entire life, revolved around. I think it has to come down to him feeling like he created the society, like his value was such that he couldn't possibly have an ill outcome from this, right? And that scene between Ward McAllister and Lena Astor, which is, was the drama of it all, right? They're just sort of sparring in her parlor, and he busts into I must see her. But he tells her, I created this society. So in that moment, Alonna and I were sort of saying, like, his hubris or his real belief in his power must have been so strong that he didn't think that any harm would come. Yeah, they might be a little bit upset, but he I think felt that was his world he'd created with Caroline Astor or Lena Astor as his tool in some ways, right? Like his way to it. And then, thinking about Truman Capote and his Swans, if anybody's watched that, I think that's on Netflix, is also really fun, where he does the same thing. He writes a tell-all thinking it's going to be fine, and it's not fine because these women trusted him. And so I think his sense of his own importance got in the way of that. I don't know if he was trying to make money or just power, it was about being the in-person spilling all the tea. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in real life, the book is really not like a wild success. Like we don't have in the 1890s, there isn't a New York Times bestseller list. So we don't know really like how it did, but I had heard some numbers thrown around that it's the equivalent of maybe like $100,000 off of sales of the book, which is not insignificant. But I mean, considering where he was in society, it's like I don't think that was necessarily the main thing. But I think you're right. Like there's that hubris there, or that ego of just feeling untouchable. And in reality, his downfall is swift in this episode. We go from that meeting in the beginning at the Van Ryn house where it's like, Mamie Fish is like, we have our marching orders, and they like go off to ruin Ward McAllister. And by the end of the episode, like he's out. Like he's effectively out. In reality, I think his downfall was a little bit slower. He died in real life only about 5 years after the show came out, but was sort of slowly excommunicated from society. By the time he died, no one really came to his funeral. Caroline Astor didn't go to his funeral. So I don't know that, again, it was quite as dramatic for the real Ward McAllister as it was for Nathan Lane, but I don't know. Are we never going to see Nathan Lane again on this show?
Imagine that's true. He's going to pop up. Well, no, because it sounds like Bertha's going to work with him on the ball?
She's not going to invite him, though.
She's not going to invite him. But I felt like she was being a little conspiratorial. Like, maybe you can help me out here. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't think we're done with him. No.
That would be a true travesty if we never got to see Nathan Lane in those fabulous suits and fabulous hats ever again. But I'm glad you mentioned Bertha, Amanda, because, that is a really interesting thing where you see how far Bertha has come in this. I'm thinking back to season 1 when, the idea of Bertha Russell standing in the Van Ryn parlor would have been just unheard of and would never have happened, to her kind of being in this inner circle and then her taking over this ball from Caroline Astor. Like, she really has reached the pinnacle of what she wanted to achieve. But of course, we know that there is a price for that. And there's a little bit of that conversation between her and Ward where she just she says exactly what you're saying, Amanda, right? Like, you've overestimated your own power. And I think that is probably in some ways a response to that pretty explosive fight that she has with George earlier in the episode, which I would love to know what both of you think about it, because I clocked it where he says, "You have too much ambition." And she says, like, we're both ambitious. Like, that's how we've ended up here. And I would just like to point out that that is extremely hypocritical from a man who is willing to run his entire family into the ground, essentially, over a railroad deal. So pot, meet kettle. And I'm just going to put that out there, that George needs to check himself in that way. But I think Bertha is realizing in real time that there are costs associated with this power grab. And we don't know how that's going to play out for her so far.
I think he was speaking about himself. I think because he knew he was in it and things are bad. I think him lashing out at her, maybe we're too ambitious, but I think there's also a part of him who, I don't know, maybe I'm being like reading more insight into George than he has. But I think part of it was also like, how's she supposed to know what he's got going on? Anyway, that's a whole other story, but he's not telling her anything. He's not looping her in.
True.
But I think he was feeling a little of his own overambition in that moment.
Yeah, probably. That's a good point. One of my favorite lines from this episode is when she goes, "Are we headed for the poorhouse?" It's like... Anyway, so they're not headed for the poorhouse because we know that Larry rides in and saves the day. Essentially, he ends up as the hero. He comes back and tells George that not only has he managed to do what he set out to do, which is to acquire these mines and acquire this land for the railroad, he has found that the mines actually are lucrative, and they are lucrative in copper, which I think is such an interesting conversation to have, because I don't think copper is often something that comes to mind when we're thinking about mines and precious metals. I think a lot of us would have assumed, hey, it's Arizona in the 1890s, it must be silver, or, something like that. But Amanda, you and I were talking about the fact that we have a very good example here in Clayton of other types of precious and semi-precious metals, like copper, like even aluminum, and that were quite expensive at the time, and sometimes actually more expensive than what you would typically think of in like gold or silver.
Yeah, no, it's true. Clayton is has those examples, and it's interesting how in this era, 1880s, 1890s, these industrialist Gilded Age families are, if they're able to, are pulling in these different very, very high-end materials into their home design and decoration. Because of course your home is your showplace. Obviously we see that with Bertha. She built this palatial, home to show off. So in Clayton, we have a couple of different rooms that have metal leaf, in particular aluminum leaf. So, pulling up some notes here, in 1888 here in Pittsburgh, actually the Aluminum Company of America, or Alcoa, comes up with a way of refining aluminum that makes it possible to be purchased. So, we have our tin cans now, but if you think back to 1892, the Fricks are remodeling Clayton, 1891, 1892. That is a home you see if you come today. And if you go into the breakfast room, we have walls with beautiful designs, a tracery kind of design on the walls with aluminum leaf in between, and it looks like silver, but at that time the aluminum was more precious than silver, and Frick is making this very interesting choice, to put that on their walls to display wealth, and also to display kind of an in-touchness with where materials are coming from, what is happening kind of in the material world. I don't think we don't really have any copper design, but this is 1894, so that aluminum extraction in real life is 1888. 1892 is the Frick home. So this is a little early, and we're not seeing it play out in the decorative design way yet, but it's coming, and it's very interesting. But it's a way of just absolutely showing I can afford the most precious materials, in my home and on my walls. No use to anybody other than decorative, but it's just another way of showing wealth and of demonstrating style and skill and money.
Yeah. And so, it's like we don't think about copper or aluminum as being particularly precious, but I had read, which this is a good point that I hadn't thought of too, is that copper was such a big deal in the 1880s and 1890s because you have all of these new inventions and all of this new technology that is using copper in the technology, copper tubing with electricity and things like that. And so copper was quite a fortuitous find for those mines in Morenci. And clearly it is enough to turn the whole thing around for George, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Of course, Larry has bad news right on the train, right off the train from Arizona, that of course his engagement is apparently over, and he, poor guy, doesn't even get a real breakup. He gets broken up with essentially at the front door with Ada, which is sad. And eventually he manages to pin Marion down, but we don't know how that's for sure going to shake out. It seems like he maybe will have a chance to redeem himself, but Marion is busy. She is distracting herself from her forlorn love life by working with Peggy to organize another suffrage meeting. This one much bigger than the one that we saw in the previous episode, and it ends up being at the Van Ryn Forte House, and we get to see Frances Ellen Watkins Harper speak again. She's speaking to a much larger group of women. She's talking to an audience that is made up of both Black and white women in this instance. And we've talked about this a little bit last week, but I think it's worth diving into again and deeper, because there's a mention of a couple of specific suffrage organizations that were really active in this time. And Alonna, I know you know a lot about this and sort of the nuances of these sort of ways in which the suffrage movement kind of splits along racial ideology, sort of out of necessity and just out of a different approach to what was important in terms of going after the vote.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first group that's actually mentioned is ASA, which is the group that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and you may hear me just refer to her as FEW Harper as we go on, just because she had such a long name, but her name does need to be said. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a part of ASA. So before there's ASA, really after the Civil War, the original American Equal Rights Association, which was known as the AERA, split in 1869. And this was an organization that was founded by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. So the issue for the split was the 15th Amendment, which granted Black men the right to vote, but left women out entirely. So in the beginning, the AERA supported the 15th Amendment because they felt that it was only a matter of time before women got the vote. But when they saw that wasn't going to happen, it left a deep rift within that organization. So some leaders, such as Anthony and Stanton, were really furious about this. They opposed the amendment unless it included women too. And their rhetoric became, unfortunately, increasingly racist. They said things like, we educated and refined white women should not be left behind ignorant Black men. And that was the moment that many Black women like FEW Harper, Sojourner Truth, and later Anna Julia Cooper actually began speaking up, not just for the vote, but for the dignity of Black womanhood. And this split actually led to the creation again of ASA and the NWSA. So the important thing about these two organizations is that they were headquartered in different parts of the country, in the Northeast still, but different parts. So the NWSA was founded in New York City by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They wanted a federal amendment, so a countrywide amendment, to get women the right to vote. And it was considered more radical, but again, it didn't necessarily include African American women. And then ASA, the American Women's Suffrage Association, was formed in Boston by Lucy Stone and many others, including Henry Ward Beecher, the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And it focused on state level change and was seen as more conservative. And they were willing to work within existing political structures, but they did include Black women, though, to a certain extent. And that's why Frances Ellen Watkins Harper became part of that movement. So even in a space like this, where Peggy's organizing, this multiracial gathering, we could actually see in the scene towards the end of F.E.W. Harper's speech that she's going between rooms, and Black women are on one side and white women are on the other side. And this definitely is art imitating life, because Black women were pushed out of the movement or expected to wait their turn. And yet, they still kept showing up and they still kept trying to draw people to the cause.
Yeah. Well, and I do appreciate, and I think the show does a nice job of sort of, even in subtle ways, just complicating the narrative for us right here with this idea of women's suffrage, because it is complicated and it wasn't an easy or straight line to women's suffrage, and even in the last episode with the smaller meeting that Peggy organized, there was even debate within these different groups about like, what is the best strategy here? Like, what should we be prioritizing? Like, what is the best route to what we want to achieve? And there was not a consensus, which I think is what you see here is a little bit of that debate. But Alonna, you were also saying that Frances Harper has a Pittsburgh connection. She taught here, right?
Yes. Based on some research I've done, she was mentioned in a few sources as teaching in Black schools, which were often held in churches. So in the basements of churches. And later, of course, she became a sought after speaker. But it didn't end there. She maintained her connection to Pittsburgh. When she became a sought-after speaker, she gave lectures at places like City Hall in 1867, and then at Brown Chapel, AME, which still exists, which is located in Pittsburgh's north side, which was then called Allegheny City. And she spoke there in 1877. And just a little bit more about her, she was a powerful orator. And she was so powerful that people often called her the female Frederick Douglass. And she drew crowds of both Black and white audiences.
I think she does name drop Frederick Douglass in the show. Like, she's like, my buddy Frederick Douglass. Like, it's just like a casual, it was a casual little name drop there.
They were friends.
Which is very fun. But yeah, obviously, like, such a strong, like, incredible. I'm so glad that they made space for her character in the show to be able to have, for us to have these kinds of conversations about that and learn more about her. Because I think, like, sometimes it's very common for people to have never heard of a woman like Frances, Ellen Watkins Harper, which is, insane. We should all know, her name. We should learn about the things that she was doing. And, Amanda, I know you were, talking about the fact that it's also worth thinking about the fact that where we are in 1884 in the show, the road is long to women's suffrage. Like, we're still in the kind of semi-early days of the women's suffrage movement in the 1880s. And even with all of these incredible women in this room listening to someone like Harper, actual suffrage is not achieved for several decades after this. So there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I had almost a wave of despair, like thinking about that as I was watching it, because they're doing such amazing work and they're so thoughtful and they're so smart and committed. And you realize, right, decades for white women, then decades more for, Black women. And, going back and thinking about the origins, the Seneca Falls Convention, the first sort of women's rights, convention organized is 1848. So we're looking at 4 decades before this, women had been starting to, raise the alarm about what was wrong and what needed to change. And, that was, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and all these women. Alonna, I love hearing you talk about this because it was such a rolling and combining and cumulative effort. But right, it goes on for decades more. So as earnest as everybody in that room is, there's so much more to be done and so much more time. And that's why I just sort of felt it in my heart, because they don't know that yet. They don't know that, but the reality of the story, of the historical narrative, is that there's a long, long road ahead of them, Black or white women, and just all of the things in between. And so, I don't know, that just kind of hit me as sort of poignant, thinking about how much they want this and how right they are and how long it's going to take.
Well, yeah, and I think like there's an interesting moment, right, where we learn, that they were going to have the meeting somewhere else, but it falls through because the husband of the original sponsor doesn't want his name associated with a meeting, right, like that. And I think that's kind of just a small reminder that in the 1880s, like suffrage was not a popular movement. Like that was not something that broadly had popular support, certainly among a lot of male voters, and that it was a little bit of a taboo subject still at that point. And I think that speaks to the fact that there was still a lot of hard fought work to be done going forward to get to the ultimate point where those goals are achieved. I want to talk a little bit more about Peggy. So her relationship with Dr. Kirkland just continues to be the sweetest and the cutest, and I love it. And them and their little picnic, and he asks her to the ball, and I'm like, she's like Cinderella. It's amazing. I love it. Like, it's like happiness for Peggy. It's just so sweet. But you can always rely on Mrs. Kirkland to just really just ruin the party when it comes to everybody's happiness. She is all too eager to throw a wrench into all of this, which of course we have another really fantastic casting of a guest star in this episode. Leslie Uggams plays Mrs. Kirkland's friend, which I don't even know if she has like a name. I don't even know if we hear her name in the episode.
Yeah, it's Ernestine.
Oh, okay. And so they're gossiping, having just like the most incredible gossip moment. And of course, what comes out is this information about Peggy's past with her first marriage. And of course, the storyline that we have seen play out in the first 2 seasons, where we learn that, she had a child as part of her first marriage. That was not a marriage that her family had approved of, or at least her dad had approved of. She believes that the infant dies in childbirth. That's not actually the case. He had been adopted away to a different family. And then of course, I think when we open back up in season 2, we learned that he actually had died shortly before Peggy had located him in Pittsburgh, which just adds in a whole other layer of tragedy to this. And so, of course, us as viewers, we know what the story is here, like, right? We know what has happened to Peggy and what she's been through here. But Mrs. Kirkland doesn't have all the facts. She just has gossip and little piecemeal pieces of information, which she very quickly runs to tell to Dr. Kirkland. And Alonna, you were talking about the fact that, we have learned enough about Mrs. Kirkland at this point that she, like a lot of people in the Gilded Age, cared a lot about perception. She cared a lot about the way that her family was viewed, and about reputation and things like this. But you were saying that her beliefs and her actions and what she prioritizes really represents a rise of something called, respectability politics. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that is and how we're seeing that play out in her character in the show?
Yeah. So respectability politics was huge, especially towards the end of the 19th century. It was this idea that if Black people, especially Black women, could present themselves in a way that aligned more with the white mainstream, with middle class values, that they might be more accepted or at least protected. But the reality, of course, was that this was a really narrow-minded kind of, thought process. It put a lot of pressure on Black women to appear to be perfect. And these ideas behind respectability politics were basically that you had to be modest, you had to be well-dressed, educated, church-going, married, and with no scandal. And I know it was like this for all women, but for Black women, it was particularly important due to the rise of tropes that associated Black women as being, inferior women. So when we look at someone like Peggy in the Gilded Age, her storyline, of course, runs right along like these expectations, unfortunately. She's educated, she's driven, she's morally upright, but in finding out that she had a child and that she was married and now, divorced, in the context of the time, that would have been a huge no-no. And it would have been seen as disqualifying, especially among the leaders of the Black community or the more image conscious parts of the Black elite. And what this respectability politics does is it is a way kind of to gatekeep within the community. And it really doesn't help anyone. And then moving on, within these aspects of respectability politics is this recurring idea of colorism that keeps appearing with Mrs. Kirkland. And this is really going along with that same belief that proximity to whiteness, not just in culture or, actions, but also within skin color, has its advantages for generational, not just, contemporary, but generational upward mobility.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. And it's like, we're seeing the ways in which these are impossible standards, right? Like they're impossible. They're intentionally impossible in a lot of ways. And I think Peggy even says she's like, I can't win with this woman. She's like, she's like, no matter what I do, it's not enough. It's not right. I'm never going to be good enough for her son. Of course, I will give Dr. Kirkland some credit. He seems to, not necessarily fall totally in line with what his mother is saying. He seems to want to hear it from Peggy. Of course, I think in the next episode, we'll see what that conversation looks like between the two of them, but she has not talked to him about this part of her personal life yet. He seems willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and talk about it. But boy, Peggy, I'm just like, you sure you want this lady as your mother?
Yeah, and you know what? She tried to talk to him, though.
Yeah,
when the whole
sure.
fight between him and Mr. Fortune, she tried, and he was like, no, I don't want to hear anything else. So it wasn't like she was actively trying to hide it, I don't think. He was just, he just didn't want to, I don't know how to say it, accept any kind of thing about her that would tarnish his idea of her, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think he sort of says oh, it doesn't matter to me, right? I don't, and I get that, but there's maybe something also, he's like, if I hear anything, then my mom's going to get after me about this and this is going to be a problem. I don't know. So he's just like, I don't want to know. So we'll see how that plays out. But Felicia Rashad is incredible in this show, but man, she not likable.
Yes.
Not likable. She is kind of a villain in this season in a lot of ways for those of us who are big fans of Peggy. So it is rough. But yeah, when she gets a hold of that information, the look on her face, where she's like, I got it. I got the thing that I'm going to use against her. And she does not waste any time. So we'll see how that plays out for Peggy. Amanda,
and can I just say one more thing? Just
Yes.
Another actor that I forgot was in this. So the actor who plays Mr. Kirkland.
Yeah.
If you are a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fan, the original, he actually played Hillary's fiance, Trevor. So if you're somebody who was a Fresh Prince, so we're saying, so the list of celebrity casting, it grows, and of course Lisa Gay Hamilton plays FEW Harper. So
yes. Yeah. So I know the casting is incredible. I have to look back. I haven't watched The Fresh Prince in years, but can I sing the theme song? Absolutely, I can. So that is, I'll have to go back and look at that. Which I'm glad you brought up, his dad, because he is not around. Mr. Kirkland is not around. And we get the sense, from the interactions that we have seen, that he is not really on board with a lot of what his wife believes and thinks. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes back into the picture as this maybe escalates, and will he, in any way kind of balance out, her viewpoints. But yeah, he's kind of MIA. I feel like he doesn't want to be around her either, because she's a lot to handle. So we have a whole bunch of other things that we want to get to really quickly at the end of the episode, because we haven't even scraped the surface on some things. We have to talk about Oscar. Oscar, of course, is coming off of our shocking moment at the end of last episode with the death of John Adams. I think we all expected that Oscar was not going to be dealing with that all that well as to be expected. At first it kind of seems like maybe he's okay, or at the very least, he's, putting a front forward. Ada and Marion right away seem to be sort of like, there's like this, you cannot possibly be this okay. Whereas Agnes is just sort of like, whatever, I think her line is just sort of like, he's a man. He doesn't feel things the way that women do. But I clocked that right away because we've talked a little bit about mourning and grief and loss in the 19th century already, across the seasons of the show. And it struck me as just the fact that like even grief is gendered in the Gilded Age, right? Like the expectations around what men feel or don't feel. And you even see that in the way that mourning was prescribed in this era. We talked a little bit about that with Ada and sort of the different stages of mourning for her husband. Now, obviously, this is complicated by the fact that no one really is supposed to know the true nature of the relationship between John and Oscar. But this idea that like men would move on from grief really quickly because, they don't have the same sort of emotional capacity as women, I think speaks a lot to that. And then we go on to learn that Oscar was in his will, and that they, he clearly had thought about these things and their relationship was very real. We find out about his sister who knew about their relationship. Which leads to like the heartbreaking scene where he comes back to the house and really kind of lets his emotions out, and it leads to quite a tense a few minutes with the women in the family. And Amanda, you were saying that clearly his reaction elicits a pretty emotional reaction from Agnes, but maybe it's not clear sort of like what the root of her emotions are as she maybe comes to realize something about her son that she has not maybe acknowledged in the past.
Yeah, I thought that was a beautifully played scene by the actors. It's short, but there's so much that happens. And you talking about him. So he's not in the will, right? The sister says, I was his because he couldn't be. But it's so interesting that like that John had set that up. I mean, I think Oscar at times since they separated thought he wasn't meaningful. Like he has to be feeling this on every level, right? That he was meaningful to John, he thought of him at the end, and just all these different things, that Oscar was important and valuable, because I think Oscar sometimes doesn't feel valuable and doesn't feel important. And he comes home, right, with all of that emotion, and nobody in that household knows any of this, and it's just a beautifully played scene where he reveals, or is like so close to revealing his truth, and they all get it in different ways. I think Marion rushes in with a protective gesture of like, he's just upset, we're gonna get him upstairs, and Ada just, I don't know what she sort of takes in. I think she knows something real is happening. And then Agnes, like, it was brilliantly done, Christy Baranski, like just this moment where you see like all these things dawn on her. And Alonna, you said it beautifully. Like, is she kind of tears up. It's like, is she ashamed? Is she heartbroken? Is she hurting for her son? Is it all the things? What is it in that split second of her emotion? But it all plays out in this feminine sphere right around Oscar, and then they whiff him out of there. But it was a really like truthful, hard, I don't know, I just thought they did it beautifully. And it's the closest, then that scene follow up with him being Marion, that's the closest he's come to revealing something real about himself that he's ever been able to do in that house. And I don't know, I just thought it was beautifully done and heartbreaking. And also Marion has the biggest heart, the most open-minded, open-hearted person, for just sort of like, it's okay, like I am, whatever this is, I am here, for you. So I thought that was really like a very they did that well. It was a lot.
Yeah.
Oscar.
There's that heartbreaking line that he says, like, he's like, I had to sit at the back of the church and I should have taken my right. I mean, that killed me when he kind of cuts himself off, because what he's saying is like, I should have been front and center in the front row. Like I was the closest thing to a partner that he ever had. Like that's where I should have been. And that's when Marion kind of is like, okay. Like, let's maybe not say it out loud. But yeah, oh God, just like heartbreaking. And, I think I think it's so sweet that he leaves him this house. I don't know what Oscar's going to do with that, but he's a homeowner now. Like he doesn't, he hasn't, there's been a big deal made. And Alana, I think you pointed this out, like Oscar is a male adult son, but he has never inherited that house that Agnes has, which I think tells us a lot about their relationship probably, and probably maybe a little bit more about Agnes, but like now he has his own house and we'll see what he does with that. So
5 years worth of upkeep. There's enough money to take care of it. So he's not he's not tied to his mother anymore in the same ways. And we'll see if he takes advantage of that and gets himself out of there and tries to build a life. He's been really beaten down, I feel like, and was just coming back out of it with John's help. And then also John Adams. Why? We've talked about this before, but why is that man's name?
I found out because I don't think this is explicit in he's a descendant of John Quincy Adams. Yeah. Like they wrote it specifically that way.
Oh, so there's a reason. Okay. There's always a reason. I should have known.
There's always a reason, but if they mentioned that in the first season, I missed it. But I saw it somewhere, I read it somewhere, and I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that was an explicit choice. I gotcha. For us, it's mostly very confusing.
An extra detail that I found funny.
Yeah. Well, Oscar is now a homeowner and he has a job. So he's really, he's becoming independent in a way that he was not before. Speaking of independence, we're going to jump across the pond and talk a little bit about Glattis and Hector. Seems like we've got like a little blossoming romance between the Duke and Glattis, which I think we're all here for. It's very sweet. A very interesting thing where he's like, your dad sent a telegram and he said maybe he can't pay for you this month, which is like a little bit problematic, but I think I'm okay with it. Like it's just like
that's concerning or something. I was like, it's more than that, sister. Like things are bad.
Yeah, she's just like, oh, really? Okay, that's weird. Okay. But they've got this blossoming romance, of course, which leads at the end to them basically being like, we're going to Newport, we're going to go to Bertha's ball, and Sarah, you should move out while we're gone and go be your own woman. But Alana, you made the very good point that might not be the best strategy because for how cute they are, whatever, Hector and Glattis don't know anything about running this castle, and they are going to need Sarah in a very real way.
Yeah. In a perfect world, Sarah and Glattis would have been able to work together. So Glattis could learn the ropes of running the castle, and then, maybe Sarah could have left then. But obviously, we've seen throughout the episodes that they don't have a friendly relationship at all. And it's mostly, we got to put some blame on Sarah, right? Sarah's refusal to kind of let go of the reins, right? But I do believe that Hector is justified in standing up for Glattis. But it is gonna backfire at some point. It really is.
Smart to think of this. I didn't think of this. You were so smart. I bet you're right, because you're right. They don't know anything.
They don't. Yeah. The castle, I think, is going to fall apart in Sarah's absence. And I can also see this as being, causing a rift between the newlyweds. There may be some blame placed on Glattis and Bertha, because Bertha's been, even though Bertha's not actively there when she was, she's making Glattis little Bertha in training. So yeah, I feel like I feel like the ire is, it's not just going to be on Glattis, but it's going to go back to Bertha and just sit on top of all the other problems that she has right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think like if you have even a little bit of empathy, like you gotta feel a little bit for Sarah in this, right? Like she has never known anything else. Like, we learned that their parents died young. She really took on this leadership role. It sounds like she kind of raised her brother. Like she clearly has been at this. Now it has clearly toughened her in a way that is not fun to be around. But like you do have to feel for her to just kind of now all of a sudden be unceremoniously kicked out, for lack of a better term. But I think that I think they're going to learn real quick that Sarah, is a necessary asset to them because she knows not only how to run this castle, but she's dealing with the tenement farmers. Like she's the way that this all works is, under her purview. So I think she's probably going to have to come back and help in some capacity, or you're right, Alana, it's all going to fall apart real fast, which would not probably be good for their marriage. But it is funny when she suggests that they just send Glattis back if the money doesn't come through.
Like, whoa.
It's like, just send an Amazon package back. It's like, get a return label, send her back.
Ruin her reputation and just send her back to the States.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was. But they are turning a little bit cute. They're a little bit cute.
Yes, but I am here for the Hector and Glattis romance. Because honestly, like, that's the best way that could have turned out. Like, it could have ended up much poorly, but it is kind of sweet, and they're both kind of like bumbling and kind of, funny and awkward, but it's very sweet. So of course, we're gonna have to end on the big cliffhanger that I don't think any of us saw coming. They got 2 episodes in a row with this last 30 seconds of the episode being shocking. Of course, we end with, George preparing to head back off to the Union Club because he is, not staying at the house right now, and he's getting some papers in order. He has had this very tense and acrimonious kind of final interaction with Clay a few episodes before, where he manages to get Clay fired again. Poor dude has gotten fired twice in one season at this point. And Clay kind of leaves it with a not even thinly veiled, like pretty overt threat that he likens himself to a cockroach and says that he's not going anywhere. And of course, then at the end, we have this guy, posing as a messenger, bursting into George's office. He shoots one guy, and then we see him raise the gun and fire, presumably at George, which is where, it cuts off. So we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. But this is without a doubt inspired by the very real life assassination attempt on the life of Henry Clay Frick, which is something that we know a little bit about here at the Frick Pittsburgh. In 1892, in the middle of a very tense labor dispute at the Homestead Steelworks, which Frick was running at the time, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of tension, a violent clash between workers and security guards that Frick had hired had happened earlier in that July. And it caused a lot of critique on Frick and sort of how he was portrayed in the press, leads essentially to Alexander Berkman, who was a self-proclaimed anarchist, to attack Frick in his downtown office here in Pittsburgh. He shoots and stabs him. And Frick survives and comes back here to our historic house, to Clayton, to recuperate. And so there, I think, Amanda, you noticed a couple of little Easter eggs. There's a lot of similarities here, and obviously we'll see how this plays out for George. But you even noticed, like, it seems like there's a very intentional mention of Pittsburgh steel mills in that last interaction with Clay that George has.
I love when they do this, and you have to sort of be listening to catch it all. But I mean, the very fact that his name is Clay, we've been saying from the beginning, because Henry Clay was Henry Clay Frick, and his family called him Clay. That's what he was known by sort of friends and family. So it's not a name you hear often. They clearly intentionally chose that for this character, who also, as you say, Kels, looks a little like Andrew Carnegie with his beard and the features, Frick's business partner. But yeah, right as Clay and George Russell are having their sort of final, ugly spat, Russell throws at him what's the line, like, you can always go and work in one of my Pittsburgh mills, this kind of scornful, with the men that you wanted me to shoot, from that last season, those episodes. So yeah, he's sort of mentioning Pittsburgh. I feel like it's been like sprinkled in little ways. I just thought in the moment when he said that, like, oh, Pittsburgh, and then this shooting happens, and I'm like, well, this is clearly our story. Here we are.
Clearly our story. Yeah, absolutely.
Frick was also stabbed. They left that part out, but we'll see, I guess, if George Russell handles his recovery as Frick handled his recovery, because we know he, came back to Clayton and recuperated and worked and wrote letters and continued to battle the labor unions and, lost children. I mean, there was a whole lot that happened. Our tour really gets into this really in a beautiful way. Tell our listeners who haven't come, please come and hear the story with us. But we'll see what direction they take this in. I can't imagine they're going to kill him off, but there's obviously some reckoning to happen around, him being injured.
I did say, I saw something that was like, Julian Fellows, he's not afraid to kill off a main character. Like, he'll do it. Like,
he's Matthew.
Yes, from Downton Abbey. I was like, he'll do it. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if the history books are in George's favor because Henry survives. So if we're sticking close to the historical narrative, George will also make it through. So we will see. We'll pick that up. I'm sure we will talk about that at length in our next episode. But we wanted to wrap up by answering a couple of viewer questions that we had in the comments from last week. Our first question is for Alonna from our viewer Properly Live, who was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the different schools of thought by Black leaders in this era about how Black Americans could rise and find success following the end of slavery. And that's something that we've seen a little bit of a show, but they were hoping that you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the late 19th century African American leaders, the two that emerge on the top are really Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. But I'm going to throw back in Anna Julia Cooper as well. So we'll start with Booker T. Booker T. really preached this kind of gospel of uplift through labor. He was very focused on vocational education and economic self-reliance. Essentially, stating that, African Americans could basically earn white respect through hard work and moral character, and pretty much keeping along the lines of the agrarian kind of jobs that they were doing prior to emancipation. When I say jobs, obviously, we know that was not paid labor, but he believed that they could continue to build towards equality if they continued in those professions rather than trying to advocate for too much too fast. While W.E.B. Du Bois, on the other hand, he was known for challenging Booker T. Washington. He called for political advocacy. He called for civil rights and agitation to get those civil rights. And he also wanted higher education for Black leaders, and he coined this term called the talented 10th. And this was, in his mind, a group of African Americans who would uplift the race through leadership, writing, and activism. And then finally, and I should say last, but definitely not least, Anna Julia Cooper. So when we're looking at Black women leaders, in addition to F.U.W. Harper and Ida B. Wells, who I think a lot of people know about, Anna Julia Cooper is actually somebody who's not talked about enough. So she looked at this idea of Black women as being agents of change. So she basically said that the way through uplift for Black women in the entire race was through Black women's intellect and activism. And she writes this book called A Voice from the South, in which she argues that the status of Black women was the true measure of a nation's progress. And just to kind of tie back to Pittsburgh a little bit, we have a very famous Pittsburgh son by the name of Martin Delany, who actually talks about this idea a little earlier than Anna Julia Cooper. And I don't know if, he influenced her, but the language is actually the same, very similar, I should say. So Anna Julia Cooper, again, is really trying to show that Black women, have been, in her words, have been doubly enslaved. So if we are to see any kind of progress and to really meet the nation's ideals, then we have to start there with Black women. So those are the three that really speak, or, the three top leaders, I would say, in the African American community during this period. And what we see in characters like Peggy or even Mrs. Kirkland's reaction echo these debates. Who gets to define, respectability? What path forward do we choose, and how? And how do race, class, and gender shape these decisions?
Yeah, well, and I thank you so much for that. I think that's, it helps sort of think about like what's going on in the bigger picture. And of course, we got to meet Booker T. Washington in season 2 when Peggy goes down there, and we see a little bit of that debate, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, like happening at the dinner table with T. Thomas Fortune. And again, I think there's so much going on in the Gilded Age like so much going on in the Gilded Age that is impacting all of these things and impacting the course of history that, you know, continues beyond the Gilded Age and plays out in the 20th century. So thank you for giving us that very quick summary of something that I'm sure you could talk, you know, you could write a whole book on those things, which many people have. So our second question comes from viewer Katie Marie, who asks, when automobiles arrived on New York City streets, and comments that they half expect Oscar to fund the rise of the automobile industry just as vengeance for John's death at the hand of a horse and carriage, which I thought was a probably a good commentary on Oscar and who we know him to be. I am happy to answer that question. We, in addition to our lovely Historic House Museum, we also have a car and carriage museum here at the Frick. And so dug into this a little bit. Cars actually show up on streets not as long as you would think after where our show is set currently. So we're set in 1884 in this season of the show. You start seeing cars on American roads as early as the 1890s. Now, not in large numbers. They are, at that point, luxury items. They are difficult to produce. They're not widely accessible. And so they're used for racing. They're used for hobbies. But doing the research, I found that the first recorded automobile accident is in New York City in 1896. So it's not that far off of where we are in the show. And it's an instance of an automobile striking a cyclist. So in New York City. So again, you know, cars bring their own sort of issues with pedestrians. We talked about this a little bit last week, that rules of the road and rules for pedestrians, crosswalks, right of ways, like all of those things, those are things that are kind of slow to come after the automobile kind of enters the scene. And what I think a lot of people maybe don't think about or don't realize is there's a good chunk of time where there are horses and carriages and cars on the road together.
Streetcars too, right?
Yeah,
Streetcars.
Yeah. Which is a lot going on. It was not easy to be a pedestrian in the second half of the 19th century. Dangerous getting out on the sidewalk during that time. So yeah, thank you so much for the questions. We love questions. Keep them coming. We have one more episode to go. So if you have any questions that you want us to address in our next episode, you can drop them in the comments here. But for now, I want to thank Amanda and of course Alonna for taking time out of their incredibly busy schedules to chat with us today about episode 7. I will also plug a very exciting opportunity. If you are local here to the Pittsburgh area, you have the opportunity to hear more from Alonna and Amanda. They are coming up at the end of October. They are going to be on a panel as part of Local History Day at the Carnegie Library here in Pittsburgh, talking about all things the Gilded Age. So if you want to hear more from these lovely ladies, you can check that out. I think there's more information coming soon to Carnegie Library's website. So keep an eye out for that. And definitely take part if you're in Pittsburgh and in the area and wanna check it out. But for now, I will just thank Amanda and Alonna again, and thank you all so much for watching. We're gonna be back for our season 3 finale. We have reached the end, which is crazy to believe. We're gonna be watching season 3, episode 8. My mind is made up. We will see you then. Thanks so much for watching.